After we stopped playing it the first time, we all looked at each other with like, oh my God. And we had shivers down the spine. This is really good.
This is Joe Wong. Welcome to the Trap Set, where each week we explore the lives of drummers. I want to play something for you. You're hearing Bela Lugosi's Dead by Bauhaus, featuring my guest, Kevin Haskins on drums. Formed in Northampton in 1978, Bauhaus was one of the seminal goth bands. Kevin's spare, hypnotic drumming style helped create the band's dark and enduring sound. After the dissolution of Bauhaus in 1983, Kevin joined two other highly influential bands, Tones on Tail and Love and Rockets, which experienced an elevated level of commercial success in the late 80s through the 90s. Kevin is also a seasoned film composer and the author of the coffee table book, Bauhaus Undead. Bauhaus is releasing the entirety of its first recording session on Friday via Leaving Records. I spoke to him at his haunted manor in Laurel Canyon, Los Angeles. And now my conversation with Kevin Haskins.
My mum could sit at the piano and pick out tunes, you know. And she's also very good at art, but her family were very poor. And she actually got a scholarship to art school, but she couldn't go because she had to go and work to help support the family. So that was kind of sad, you know.
How had that manifested by the time you came about? Was she a frustrated artist?
I think to a degree, but she probably just put it aside and gone on with her life. Towards the end of her life, she took up painting, and I've got some of her paintings, like landscapes and still lifes. So she, towards the end of her life, she got to express herself. So that was nice,
And you said that she was adept at picking out tunes. What kind of tunes were on in your house?
I remember the Carpenters and Matt Monroe, Frank Sinatra, a lot of crooners, that kind of music. And when the 8 tracks came out, remember my dad brought a Gary Glitter 8-track, which
so your parents were kind of hip.
Not really. Maybe that was our influence, or maybe maybe our dad picked up on Gary Glitter through me and my brother, and thought, I don't know, maybe but he used, they would have parties and they would put that on,
When did you start developing your own taste?
I think with the Beatles, I think they appealed, with songs like Yellow Submarine and Octopus's Garden. I think that was appealing to kids because, in 66, I was 6 years old, and 68, I was 8 years old. So I remember we would pretend we were in the Beatles, and there was like a sand pit at our school, and that was the stage. And at break time, we'd go and stand in the sand pit and pretend to be the Beatles. So I remember that. So that was,
You're doing air guitar. Would you air guitar or air drum at that point in your life?
Probably air guitar. Yeah, I didn't have any thoughts on being a drummer until I was about 11 or 12.
What brought about those thoughts?
My brother decided he wanted to play, music, play guitar, and he teamed up with a friend at school, and they, practiced together for a little bit, and then they needed a drummer. So my brother said, "Do you want to play the drums?" And I was like, "Yeah, that sounds exciting." And once I kind of got the idea into my head, it became this really weird obsession where I would get a scrapbook and I'd cut out drum kits out of magazines and pamphlets and stick them in the scrapbook, and then it was just fascinating to me. My parents used to go to the conservative club.
What is the conservative club?
Well, it's like a Republican club, and then the opposite to that was the working men's club, which was a Labour Party.
So it was basically like a social club.
Yeah, and so they'd have dinner and dances, and one night they took me, and I was watching the drummer the whole night, just fascinated. And this guy, whose name is Keith Cumberpatch, he became my first drum teacher. But he'd be drumming and smoking, and I remember he'd take the cigarette out of his mouth and stick it in the hi-hat, like clamp it into the hi-hat while he was playing.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah. And I was just thinking, like, I'm going to be a drummer. I want to be a drummer. How am I going to know how to set? Like the kit looked so complicated to me, and I was concerned about, would I be able to figure out how to set the kit up?
I remember when I would see drum kits, I was confused by the bass drum at first because I didn't realize there was a pedal on the other side of it that the guy was playing.
Yeah, makes sense.
What kind of things did Keith teach you?
He, he had a practice kit set up, and then a real drum kit the other side of the room, and all I wanted to do was get behind the real drum kit. But he had a whole process where you can't get behind that kit until you've, been coming here for at least 6 months. So, rudiments like, single stroke, double roll, paradiddles, all those rolls, which was so dreadfully boring to me. Mm-hmm. And eventually, the day came where you could get behind the kit. And then he taught me 3 beats, which was the bossa nova, a pop beat, and a jazz beat. One interesting thing he did do is, once I kind of grasped those beats a bit, he really put me on the spot, actually. One day, so he said, "Play the pop beat." And he said, "Okay, now I want you to put fills in." And I was just like, "What? What am I going to do?" And he said, "Come on, just do it, So I felt very kind of self-conscious, because now I've got to kind of probably reveal myself or become more vulnerable, And but I managed to put a couple in.
Were you a relatively self-conscious child to begin with?
No, to begin with, I was not a self-conscious child at all. I was very gregarious. But something happened somewhere along the line that really made me retreat into my shell. And
do you know what that event was?
I'm not sure. And I mean,
Was drumming a way out of the shell?
I suppose so, yeah. Never really thought of that. I mean, I do find it interesting that a lot of performers, on stage, they're just completely outgoing and gregarious, and in their private life, are the complete opposite, Well, I've always kind of felt at odds with the drum kit, that it's kind of a bit of a battle. I never felt completely... only on, odd occasions. And I look at, I've toured with Steve Perkins and Budgie and Josh Freese and those guys, and I watch them from the side of the stage, and I just, they become part of the kit, there's this beautiful flow and ease. And I mean, I have felt that at times, but it's weird. I've never felt completely that comfortable for some reason.
Even when you were by yourself in your own kind of world?
Well, I do. Yeah, I mean, I didn't play drums for 8 years up until a couple of years ago when Daniel, Ash, and myself went out with my daughter and did Pop Tone, and I would be practicing here in my studio, and my dogs be here watching me, and I'd be very, very much at ease. But once we went out on tour, playing on stages, I'd, get really nervous and and it's just psychology. It's really weird because, I've been doing this all my life, there's no reason to be nervous.
Well, some people would argue that the reason that you were nervous is because it's so important to you.
Well, I suppose I always want every show, to go really well, and I want everyone who's in the audience to be really satisfied, at least, or blown away. And so there's that kind of pressure, if you like, that's put on it.
When was the first time that you were blown away as an audience member?
Well, I'll tell you the Led Zeppelin. Actually, I saw the Who before that at Charlton Athletic Football Ground with the sensational Alex Harvey Band and Little Feat.
Wow.
Yeah. And, I was only I was probably 14, and that was pretty mind-blowing. And my brother would take me to these shows, and then we saw Led Zeppelin at Earl's Court, and that was about, in 75 or early 76, and, they were this amazing rock band in their prime. And John Bonham played this half-hour drum solo, 20 minutes long, and it was amazing. And I left that show feeling, part of me was completely elated from seeing this amazing band, And another side of me was really depressed because I knew that I'd never be able to play as well as John Bonham. And so I was really deflated and, thinking of giving it up. And what's the point? And then it was probably like 4 or 5 months later, my brother and I went to the 100 Club and saw the Sex Pistols and the Clash at this little punk festival. And I just left high school with long hair and flares, and and that went down into this basement, and there's just all, like Susie Sue was there in retrospect, Sid Vicious, and everyone from that scene, and they all looked amazing, and it was really kind of a feeling of danger, and it was, I think my eyes would just, my mouth, jaw was dropped for most of the evening, just like taking all this in. And I know it sounds like a cliche, but they, when I heard these bands I just thought, oh my God, this is amazing. It's so exciting. And I can do this. Later on, I met Mick Jones and Joe Strummer, and I just wanted to thank them, because really that show had a huge impression on me, and made me have the motivation and then I was excited again. Like, I want to, it kind of reinvigorated me.
What were your ambitions when you were leaving high school?
During high school, we had a careers class. And my dad, he started off delivering newspapers in a van, and he bought more vans and trucks. So he had kind of a small trucking company. But he wanted something from me and my brother to, take over. So he bought a newsagent shop, like it's newspapers, toys, tobacco, candy. And we had no interest in this at all, absolute zero interest.
Did it break his heart?
A little bit, I think, yeah. But I remember doing this careers class, and so you had to pick something. So I picked, the news. It's like, well, I don't know what I want to do other than I really want to do music. That's what I knew. Well, I knew, completely I wanted to do that, but I wasn't sure if that would work out. And I remember they had a little magazine for this class that I guess they sent to all the schools who, had a class like this. And one issue was on the cover. It was "So You Want to Be a Rock Star," with John Peel, the radio DJ's face on it. And I remember opening it, and it was like a centerfold, and it's like, "Do you want to?" And there's all these stars, and John Peel was kind of like, saying, "Well, by all means pursue it, but it's not only one in a million make it," and blah 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 blah. And I remember reading that and thinking, I'm going to do this, and I was so determined. Like, it was such a huge driving force. Really, like a big turning point was seeing Bowie on Top of the Pops doing Starman. And I think if you asked anyone from my generation who was involved in music or post-punk music, I'm sure everyone from all those bands would say the same thing. I mean, it really was remarkable and fascinating to see this guy, this androgynous, beautiful creature, and talking about this alien coming down, and then at one point he pointed his finger into the camera and said, "I picked on you, hoo." And we all thought Bowie was just pointing at us individually, and I could go on and on, but we know how much charisma that guy had. And during the 70s, there were a lot of strikes, like the garbage people went on strike, and trash was literally piling up in the streets and not being taken away, and rats running around. And then we had power companies on strike, and so they would limit the electricity, and they would cut it off at night. So at nighttime we'd have candlelight. So it was like going back 100 years into Dickensian times. With there was a period where it felt very dark, like literally dark, and with no power, there's an eerie stillness. And candlelights are eerie and throwing shadows, and so I always remember that quite vividly. So, yeah, and then you see Bowie just come out of this glorious, like beautiful, multicolored, glammy, androgynous creature.
You were very determined. How did you achieve what you set out to do? Part of me knew, I think, that I would be a professional musician. And each band, well, to begin with, I was in a covers band with my brother, and it was called Jam. And that, from like being 13 to 15, or 12 to 15, and we would play American Air Force bases and working men's clubs and anywhere and we would play the Beatles and Rolling Stones and, contemporary, like, status quo songs. And how often would you work?
My memory of it was quite often, probably every week we played a gig.
These were paying gigs.
Yeah. Really paying our dues. And one time there's this steel town called Corby, which was populated by mainly Scottish people, and it was a very hard and violent place. I think it was probably the first city to ever have shutters up on the store windows at night, and we played Corby Seniors Football Supporters Club or something. So it was seniors, and we were getting bottles thrown at us during our show. And there was, pretty much every song there would be a bottle come flying and smashing against the back wall, like that scene in the Blues Brothers. And you know, I was like 13 years old and just like, you know, and we weren't bad. You know, we were actually pretty good.
They were just angry.
They're angry about something, maybe because we're English. And actually, I picked up a hell of a lot playing along to those songs and learning those songs, you know. Like, I remember in Love and Rockets when we were doing Kundalini Express, this song, and it starts with a kind of a guitar chugging. And there were all these fills I did, and they just came out of somewhere, and I don't know where they came from, but they did, and I think that's where they, you know, came from, was from those songs.
This episode of The Trap Set is brought to you in part by Collectivo Coffee. Handmade coffee since 1993. Check them out online at collectivo.com.
So anyway, myself, my brother, and then Daniel Ash, we were in different bands. One was kind of a power pop kind of band that was more kind of a Nick Lowe kind of vibe, or a pub rock kind of vibe. And then it's called Jack Plug and the Sockettes, and then that became the Craze. And I think, so Daniel was in those bands, but he was just in them to be in a band. He didn't like the music. He was basically playing this like ding 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 ding
Sure.
ding ding, and it was more my brother's vision, you know. So once those were over, and each of those bands, I thought, this is the one, and I thought, oh my God, this is it. We've finally, as each band, you know, each progression, I was convinced, like, this is the one, and then it didn't happen, and then really deflated, very, you know, depressed. And then a little period of time went by, and unbeknownst to me, Daniel had gone and visited Peter Murphy, who Daniel was at high school with, and they were both into Bowie. Daniel had no idea if he could sing or not, but he just remembered they were pals, they were into Bowie, and he looked interesting. And Daniel thought, I'll just go and see if he wants to be in a band. Like, no idea if he could sing, which is remarkable. So he visited Peter, he was working at a printers in Wellingborough, a town 10 miles away, and Peter was like, you know, if this is my ticket to get out of here, absolutely. So he was on board. And they rehearsed for a couple of weeks, and then Daniel called me and said, do you want to be in a band? And I was like, absolutely. Yeah. You know.
So your optimism regenerated after the deflating
yes.
feeling.
Yeah. Because I thought that was it. And then...
So can you remember the first Bauhaus rehearsal?
Yeah.
Did it feel different?
Yeah. I mean, Peter has an amazing voice, you know. And he has so much charisma and such a presence that I knew that this was in a league above the others.
And not only that, it was more unique. Like, you found your own sound finally after trying on like the Nick Lowe.
Well, what's interesting is, and I can kind of segue into this new Bauhaus release, which is called the Bela Session. There's one song in particular on this release called Some Faces, and it doesn't sound like Bauhaus at all. Like, it sounds like this power pop, this light, breezy, chirpy, with a kind of chirpy swagger to it song, and so that was that was kind of an overhang or hangover from the previous band, The Craze. So we were finding it. It's weird because we were finding a sound. But, not long after we got together, we wrote Bela, which was, definitely our sound.
And you kind of pulled that bossa nova beat that Keith taught you out of your memory for that one.
So yeah, we played a few shows, and Daniel didn't want David to be in the band because he said, no, this is my vision, that David will, his influence will be too controlling and heavy and turn it, and I don't want him in. And I kind of knew that David would be the missing piece of the puzzle that would make this band complete. And eventually Daniel relented. And David came along to the first rehearsal with the lyrics to Bela Lugosi's Dead and gave them to Peter. And Daniel said, I came up with this kind of haunting riff last night that I think will go with this. So he started playing that. And I'm sitting there going, what am I going to do? And I just, because this was kind of moving fast. And so I thought, I'll try this bossa nova beat I learned and just play that and not just play it over and like a loop. And I started playing it and it felt good. And David joined in with the bass line, and it seriously was written. The first time we went through it was, the real essence, and maybe it was probably 85% close to what happened, what you hear on the record, which is kind of remarkable. And after we stopped playing it the first time, we all looked at each other with like, oh my God. And we had shivers down the spine. This is really good.
I'm getting shivers just thinking about it.
And we actually made a decision, let's not play this. Let's play it one more time because it was so exciting, but then not to play it anymore because we were scared that we might start to kind of overthink it.
Yeah.
So, and then we recorded it as soon as we could.
How did you go about recording it? Did you just finance it yourself and find a label to put it out?
Yeah, there's this studio called Beck Studios in Wellingborough, and we'd been there before with previous bands, and there's this wonderful guy that owned it, and I think he actually built the desk. His name is Derek Tompkins, and for me, he was kind of like our George Martin. He looked a little bit like him, was older, and was kind of, he had no understanding of any fad or fashion. He was too far removed, which is a good thing, I think, because he just would get the purest representation out of a band that he would record and mix. And later on, he would come up with, there's a song called Swing the Heartache, a Bauhaus song. And I wanted this industrial kind of metallic snare drum. So I went outside and found these, metal dustbins that we had at that time. And I don't know if you've tried this, but they're extremely disappointing when you mic up dustbin, metal, because they sound so loud, but when you mic them up, unless you treat them. But so he said, and he had this wonderful study. He was like, Kevin, I got an idea. Come into the control room. So I went in the control room, and he went up to this closet, and I thought it was a closet. So he opened the door, and there was this metal plate hanging inside, and a microphone in front of it. And I was like, what's this? And he said, that's the plate reverb. So that was the traditional old school way of plate reverb. It was actual.
It sounds like he may have built that himself.
I'm sure
in a closet.
He did. Yes, yeah. So you would have a speaker, anything that you want. I'm just imparting this to people who are not aware.
There was a company called EMT in I believe Germany that made the commercial ones, but lots of people built homemade plate reverb. So it sounds like this is a case of that.
Yeah. So anything you wanted reverb on, you would feed through the speaker. it would hit the metal plate and create this reverb sound, and then you'd have a microphone to pick up that, effect. So he said, could you just come up here and just like, every time you want a snare drum beat, just flick the plate with your finger.
Really lightly.
Really lightly,
Yeah.
yes. You've done this.
Yes, I have.
It was amazing. We were all on the dole, like, if you didn't have a job, you got a bit of money, but not much. So we would make these awful meals of potato, vegetables, and just overboil this stuff until potatoes were just, mush, and all the taste gone out. Like we were not very good in the kitchen, let's put it that way. And we weren't very good at putting the trash out as well. So that piled up in the larder, and then we got infested with rats, and this was anyway, we were all huddled in the kitchen around this transistor radio, and we heard Bela coming out of it, and that was another landmark moment. It was just like hearing your song come out of the radio.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, it was like, I can still very strong memory of that.
So you moved on, and you moved to Beggars, or more specifically 4AD, for the first full-length recording.
Yeah.
Were you still on the dole at that point?
Yes.
Even though you had this song that's now become an iconic song, and it was at the top of the indie charts.
Yeah. When we signed the contract with 4AD, then we got an advance. They actually paid us monthly, so it was something like £40 a month, which I think on the dole we were getting maybe £5 a month or something. So not only when we signed a long-term contract, we were getting paid. We were now professional musicians. So that was incredibly exciting. We signed an awful contract. We signed everything away for perpetuity.
Even publishing.
Everything, yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. It was terrible. We took it to the Musicians Union lawyer, and I remember being in his office, and he was just this guy that looked so bored with his job, and did us a great disservice by just saying, yeah, this is well, it was standard, I suppose, to a degree.
Yeah, probably.
And yes, and we didn't really care, to be honest. We were so excited to have we'd have signed anything, So so that was very exciting. This is another benchmark moment in our dreams being fulfilled.
And did you start touring more once that record was completed?
Yeah, we got on a magazine tour, the Big Band magazine, and we had to pay £2,000 to go on that tour, which was probably the equivalent now of maybe $20,000. Maybe. But that was, what happened then, I think. So a record label fronted that money because we didn't have that money. And that was really good for us because, the magazine pulled in a lot of people, and we stole a lot of their audience away from them, I think, after that, from that tour. So that was very beneficial, and also, exciting. We're going on a tour.
Was that a UK tour? Or?
Yeah.
Yeah. And when did you come to the States for the first time?
I think it was like 81.
Okay. So you were 21.
Yeah.
And did it feel like you were a rock star coming to the United States and going on tour?
I guess so, but I've never, from time to time people have referred to me as a rock star, and I just laugh because I can't relate to that, and I'm just like, I'm not a rock star. And then I think maybe in the late 80s, at the height of Love and Rocket's success, I suppose you could call me a rock star then. But I can't really relate to it, you know. But anyway, yeah, I mean, it felt amazing, but it was like being carried along by a wave,
right,
of wonderfulness, you know.
The band came along at precisely the right time.
Oh yes, yeah, definitely.
You were a part of the new paradigm.
Yeah, this whole post-punk movement, yeah.
And earlier you mentioned that some of the other members of the band early on were fighting for creative control. What was your creative role in the band, aside from just coming up with the drum beats? Like, did you feel like it was artistically fulfilling in other ways?
I used to do a lot of the flyers, you know, so sometimes get involved with the sleeves, but David took on most of that, and Daniel. Then in the studio, there was always all four of us, you know, getting our hands on the mixing desk and fighting each other.
Why did the band ultimately break up?
I didn't see it coming, but it was really just ego clashing, really. It just became, I mean, I was okay. I was kind of like the mediator, you know. I was kind of trying to keep the peace all the time, and a little bit naive as to, you know, what was going on. That's why it came as a surprise when it happened, you know. I didn't see it coming. But
how did you feel?
I was devastated. Yeah, I was just like this. I mean, it was a crazy ride, you know. During that time, we, you know, got to meet David Bowie and be in that movie, and met Nico from Velvet Underground. They were a huge influence on us, and went on Top of the Pops, which was a boyhood dream. Got to play in this, you know, amazing band that was really innovative, and went traveling around the world, you know. All that happened in the space of a few years. So,
and also I would imagine that the band was central to your identity at that point. You were the drummer for Bauhaus.
Yeah, I mean, it still is. I mean, I was just thinking about that the other day, how, you know, you get defined by, you know, these bands you've been in. And my daughter came up with the phrase "recognized." She said, "Oh, I got recognized today," and so I've taken that on. So, you know, you still get recognized, but yeah, it was really, you know, it was extremely devastating. Like the bottom of my world fell through.
When you started Love and Rockets, was there a mission statement was there like an artistic mission statement that you had in mind? Well, that diverged from Bauhaus or your other projects?
No. And I was going to the first rehearsal, and I thought, this is going to be weird, and what are we going to do? You know, so I thought of coming up with a cover song that we could cover to kind of break the ice. So I just went through my single collection, and I had Ball of Confusion by the Temptations, and I thought, wow, this would be kind of interesting to have a go at. And so I said, I brought that along at the first rehearsal, and so everyone was into it. You know, unfortunately, it, you know, then we were surprised how relevant the lyrics were, and they're still completely relevant, you know, unfortunately. So there was that, you know, that aspect that was attractive. And really, I have to give a mention to John Rivers, at Woodbine Studios is where we recorded it. Because I was trying to kind of play a funky beat, and he said, just play your pop beat. It's like, boom, ch, boom, boom, ch, boom, ch. So it's got a little bit of a swing to it, but so that was his idea. So he really kind of helped. He really did produce that.
So essentially, he zeroed in on what you're uniquely qualified to do. He wanted to.
He's a great producer, engineer.
When did you move to LA?
I moved to LA in 1990, I think, or 91.
What was the impetus to come out here?
I met my wife, who's born and bred here, on Turns on Tail tour, and it was kind of love at first sight. And so we met. We're actually doing an in-store in LA at Vinyl Fetish, and Joseph Brooks, who was still a friend, really nice guy, he gave us these tickets to go and see Public Image at the Palace. And we thought these were special VIP tickets. So we all showed up, and there was like 1,500 people outside with these same tickets. And they were just keeping everyone outside, and Glenn was like, let's go to a bar, F this. And me and Dan's like, no, we want to see Pearl. And so he cleared off, and eventually we got in, and I saw my wife across the room, and just like, it was an instant connection. So I forced her to come and live in England. And, after 7 years, I think, she said, I've got to go home. I can't do this.
She couldn't eat the mushy peas and beans on toast anymore.
She was horrified. She came to my house. It was a real culture shock for her, because I lived in a little terrace cottage on the edge of Northampton with a graveyard across the street and a church. It was actually very quaint.
That's very goth.
Yes. Yeah. And, my house is tiny compared to American houses. And she came in, and she was just like, she thought I was living on the coast for some reason. And actually, Northampton is the furthest point in England. It's like you can't be any further from any coast. It's like the actual complete middle. Because she loves the ocean. So that was a disappointment. So the first day wasn't that good. And then I said, I'll cook dinner. And I used to have you would have a steak and kidney pie in a can.
Sounds
and you would
delicious.
boil it in water.
You boiled the can in water.
And then when it was, heated up enough, you would open it gingerly with a can opener and burn your hand, and steam would come out. And then it was the most disgusting, thing you could ever, eat. So she actually, because she
must have really loved you if she put up with that for 6 years.
She told me, I can't cook, I'm like, that's okay, I can cook. And then she became a really good cook out of necessity.
When did you have your first child?
In 1987.
How did that change your outlook?
You kind of revisit yourself as a child. You see everything through a child's eyes again. Not everything all the time, but, so you kind of remember that sense of wonder and, fascination with life, really.
And when your daughters wanted to learn how to play drums, how did you teach them?
I don't know where I got this idea from, but I would write out, I learned to write simple drum music, so I'd write out the beat, and which was, my daughter really responded to that, and she still has. Her band just covered a song, and she couldn't figure out how to play this fill, which was actually a really simplest, most minimal fill. So I wrote it out for her, and then she could play it. So she kind of, that's how she sees music.
I would be remiss if we didn't talk about the reissue.
Right.
How did the reissue of Bela come about?
So I mentioned I put out a coffee table book on Bauhaus, and when I started just to posted it on social media. I had a couple of fans, Vincent Forrest and Andrew Brooksbank, kind of contact me and say, we have big collections ourselves and memorabilia, and so I got talking to them, and after I'd finished my book, out of the blue, Andrew one day said, "Why don't you re-release all the music that you recorded on the day that you recorded Bela?" And I thought this is a brilliant idea, and couldn't realize why we hadn't thought of it ourselves before. He said, this will be the holy grail for Bauhaus fans. So that's what we're doing. I think it's really interesting because you hear kind of the band at that time, it was just forming. So some of the music, was kind of hangover, like I said before, from previous bands, and with Bela, of course, we kind of nailed that one and kind of found a sound with that. So it's kind of very eclectic. There's kind of a ska song on there, and so it's an interesting moment, in the history of the band, the formative, moments.
It seems like every British band from that era has a ska song, at least one ska song. Some of them have ska albums. Earlier, you mentioned the feeling that you got the first time you played Bela. How often do you get that feeling now?
I thought that I was done with drumming 18 years ago.
Why?
And touring. But at that stage, I'd been doing it for 20 years, and I wanted just to be at home, and that's how I got into composing. I want to get into a new area of music where I can stay at home, and I'm so over touring, like I can't deal with it anymore. But thankfully, our agent Mark Geiger at William Morris Endeavour, he suggested that we just go out on little runs of like 8 shows at a time, a maximum. And that in that way you won't end up hating each other and hating it, and having fun. So so in doing that anyway, I got great enjoyment out of playing those songs again, and really it felt to me the feeling was as close to how the feeling was back in the day, as far as I can remember. So it was very enjoyable.
Do you ever get that feeling listening to other music?
Oh yeah. I drum along to all these punk songs, the Jam, and Pistols and the Clash and the Damned, and those songs, still send me,
That's great.
And just Stranded, that song there's such, all the ones I've cherry picked are great songs, that have a great energy, and so they still affect me in the same way, which is great.
Have you ever fallen out of love with music?
Yeah, actually, during the 90s, I didn't want to listen to rock music at all. I had no time for it, and I was really got into dance music, and that whole rave scene and Underworld and the Orb and Primal, that Screamadelica album was great. And I thought, I'll never want to listen to rock music again, and it didn't mean anything to me anymore. And at the end of that decade, I got bored with dance music. I'm just and I thought, oh, this is going to be over now. It's kind of run its course, but then it's little did I know that it would carry on and on and on. And then I got into rock music again.
When you're walking around in public and you see somebody in a Bauhaus t-shirt, how do you feel?
I feel, an English word, chuffed.
Can you translate that for the non-English listeners?
It makes me feel happy, and what I find funny is it happens quite often, actually, and people never recognize me. And sometimes I'll kind of walk closer to them.
Just to see you?
Yeah. I have no idea, So it's fun. That's funny. I think a certain amount of Ramones, Joy Division, and Bauhaus T-shirts are worn by people who have no idea who the bands are.
Yes.
But they're kind of iconic T-shirts, if you will.
Well, I'm chuffed to have had you on the podcast. Kevin, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
The Trap Set is produced by me, Joe Wong, along with Chris Karwowski, who also edits the program. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at The Trap Set, and visit our website, thetrapset.net, to subscribe to our show for free. If you enjoyed what you heard today, please donate to our show. If you can't afford to donate, please tell a friend and give us a good rating on iTunes. Send your feedback and guest requests to thetrapset@gmail.com.